All right, it is Thursday, July 15th, 2021, and this is the Fight Business Podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Auger, and today we're going to talk about UFC 264 pay-per-view buys. We did get some numbers from John Orland over at the Sports Business Journal, and we're going to talk about what it means for Conor McGregor, Dustin Poirier, and the UFC, as it was a big night for everyone involved. Then we're going to focus in specifically on Conor McGregor. He's now lost 2 in a row by TKO, doctor stoppage or not, and a lot of people are questioning whether or not that's going to hurt his drawing power. I'll break down what that means for McGregor moving forward, as well as how the UFC can still market and promote him even if he's not involved in the title picture. Then we're going to talk about nostalgia, with Robbie Lawler versus Nick Diaz 2 being booked as the co-main event for UFC 266. I'm going to explain why the UFC did this from a business point of view, as well as how it could give a bump to the pay-per-view numbers. Then we're talking PFL. So we have some new news out about the PFL and future seasons, not just this upcoming season. And a lot of people are scratching their heads at the PFL's decision to possibly start a pay-per-view division. I'll break that down from the business point of view because I think there is some merit in why they might do it. And it's going to be a little bit of a head scratcher and a little confusing, so I'll guide you through that. Lastly, we're talking about David Levy joining the board of One Championship. Levy is a former president of Turner Media for about 6 years and a power player in the media space. We'll talk about what it means for One Championship moving forward, as well as what we can expect him to do on the board. With that in mind, timestamps at the bottom as always, and let's go ahead and dive right in. All right, so first up is UFC 264 pay-per-view buys. We do have the numbers in from John Orland, and it turns out the event did 1.3 million domestic through ESPN Plus, and then another 500K international on top of that for a total of 1.8 million pay-per-view buys. That's a huge number. And I believe my estimate was 1.4 million, so I was a good 400K short. I think I misjudged this for a couple of reasons. One, McGregor being knocked out was a big deal. Did give Poirier a boost. I'm not ready to say Poirier is going to have the full superstar rub that we've seen through Holly Holm or Diaz yet, but I think there's good indications that he may in fact be a draw even on his own once he fights other opponents outside of McGregor. 2, I think that this was true in the Nate Diaz fight and will always be true. People come back story and want to see if someone can actually achieve it. So, you have McGregor beating Cerrone very easy, saying he's back, doing that whole thing, and then getting knocked out by Poirier after he won the first round. I think a lot of people were looking to see, is the old Conor going to come back? And it, looked like a different fight this time around. Still favored Poirier, but it was a different Conor in the lead up even. It was a whole different aura about it. And I think that drew a lot of people in. A lot of people wanted to see, is he going to be able to bounce back? So I think those two factors played a big role. And the last thing I think that influenced this is the live Vegas crowd, right? And the lead up and coming out of a pandemic. The last time we saw Conor fight was in Abu Dhabi, and you had a small crowd there, but it wasn't anything like a typical McGregor fight week. Now, coming out of the pandemic where, you had a packed stadium, you had a packed press conference, you had the old McGregor feel to it, I think that helped quite a bit. I think it gave it a bigger feel and thus permeated out into the casual audience more, rather than, hey, McGregor's fighting, but it's going to be, kind of in Abu Dhabi and not have a crowd there and everybody's still dealing with pandemic stuff. I think that really, just gave it another level. And it felt like, at least to me, that this event was much bigger than anyone thought it was going to be. I had a lot of media friends, a lot of, fighters say that it just felt like a much bigger event than they expected, especially because these two just fought, not that long ago. So I think those 3 factors really, play a part into why this did so well. I again, focusing specifically on Dustin and what this means for him. This is great in terms of the money he'll make, because I'm sure he had pay-per-view points on this fight. I don't think he had pay-per-view points last time. And, especially with all, of McGregor's antics and his, just his decision to continually attack both Poirier and his wife. Poirier stayed very composed. He looked like the much mature fighter, more mature fighter, looked like someone who, was out there and really just focused on getting the win, and still promoted his Good Fight Foundation, still, came up with good comebacks to McGregor in the press conference, with McGregor, asleep. He even admits should have been McGregor fast asleep, which, yes, that is true. But still, I mean, he wasn't caught super off guard. He was pretty calm and cool and collected. Even when McGregor was running his mouth, talking about, killing his wife and him and all that shit, it was very bad in terms of what McGregor did. But I mean, Poirier just stayed composed and made a bunch of money. And my guess would be is that while I don't think he's going to rise to the level of maybe a Nate Diaz or an Izzy or anything like that, he is a likable guy. He does charity work, and he should get a rub from this. The only thing that hurts Poirier here, which sucks, unless the fan base goes with him, which a lot of the fan base did turn on McGregor. There's a whole video we have out about that. But unless the fan base turns to feeding into more of that good guy aspect, it's unfortunate, because Poirier is really the type of guy to be respectful to his opponents, go in there, put on a great show, but not trash talk to a level that we've seen some of these other stars trash talk to. That's not to say he can't break out, right? That's really not to say that, and I hope he does. But from what we've historically seen, I don't necessarily think the way he's promoted his fight so far will work in getting him to that next tier of superstardom. If he decides to change it up, and he doesn't even necessarily have to change it up too much, right? He can just do a little bit more trash talk here and there, and focus on, more comebacks to trash talk and that type of thing. I think he's got a good shot at, getting a little bit more traction. But unfortunately, nice guys finish last in this business in terms of drawing power. So I don't know exactly where he's going to end up. His next fight against an opponent not named McGregor, because we know the fourth fight may be coming, and I'll talk about that here in a minute. His next fight against another opponent will be a big indicator, because he will almost certainly be booked as the A side to that fight. And I would also imagine they would want to look at the numbers and put him as the main event. You could put him as a co-main, but as we've talked about before, that isn't as much of an influencing factor in terms of, pay-per-view buys. So providing he wants to do a quick turnaround and McGregor's going to be a while, you do Poirier versus Oliveira for the belt. And I would say Poirier is the clear A side in that fight from a business perspective. We'll see what happens there, but I hope he gets more of a rub than I'm sort of expecting him to get, but you never know. We've seen it in the past where the rub just doesn't quite work, and it can be rough. I think he'll get something. I can't imagine he won't get something, but it is not a certainty to say that he's going to be put on a new level of superstardom or in the same realm as even Nate Diaz, because he's not the first person to stop this speeding McGregor hype train, right? We've seen Diaz do it. We've seen Habib do it. Poirier is number 3. It's going to be interesting if he's able to drop. Focusing on the UFC side of things, I think this is a great scenario for them, because obviously you've got your second highest pay-per-view buy rate ever. But the way the fight ended is even better for them, because as Dana said, like they'll do a fourth fight, and he's kind of said, oh yeah, well, you can't end a fight on that. It's an injury. And yeah, it was an injury. It was. I don't want to go down the path of talking about, oh, he would have been finished anyway and all that stuff. Never know. Right? I truly believe that McGregor was still in that fight, even if Dustin won the first round. But you don't want to go down the path of like, oh, it was over anyway, all that stuff. And yes, when you look at previous fights, say Anderson Silva versus Chris Weidman 2 with the injury, or other fights where people have, gotten a TKO win due to the other fighter being injured, a lot of times it's just, okay, well, he won, and they move up, and the person who lost moves down or is looking for at least an equal horizontal opponent. Rarely moves up. But this is Conor McGregor. And from a business perspective, Dana has to promote it as, no, that was a doctor's injury. We have to run it back. Why would he not? Why would the UFC not? You just sold 1.8 million pay-per-view buys, which I'm sure even blew the UFC's estimates out of the water in terms of what they thought this would bring in. Second highest pay-per-view of all time. Of course you run it back. You have an excuse to run it back. One that you point to, and that even the most diehard fans will be like, well, I guess. That's stupid, but I guess. Because that's the fact. It was a injury that stopped the fight. And enough hardcore fans will even begrudgingly admit, like, well, yes, Conor was still technically a threat. So we got to run it back, is what Dana and co will say. Of course. That's the easiest business call in the history of business calls for the UFC. Because I guarantee if you run that back, even if you don't do 1.8 million, you're probably still in the realm of 1.5, 1.6 minimum. And there's a good shot you end up at 1.8 or even higher, depending on how bad the blood gets between these two, because Dustin was kind of, brushing off a lot of the stuff. But at the end there, it started to get nasty. So that makes the feud even that much bigger. And we know what feuds can do for drawing power. Look no further than Daniel Cormier and John Jones. John Jones' biggest fights were against Daniel Cormier. And a big reason for that was, yes, Cormier was very good, which you could easily say Poirier is as well, but also because they had so much animosity and bad blood. People love drama. It's simple. MMA fans are no exception. So they will for sure run that fight back at the possibility that they can. That is the only move for the UFC to do, is you put McGregor on ice, you let him heal, you let him do other things. You do not have him fight someone else. Not even Nate Diaz. Because I've seen that thrown around a lot too. And yes, there is an argument in terms of throwing McGregor and Diaz together, finally getting that trilogy done. And, McGregor should win that fight, and then he can fight Dustin. There you go. But that comes with a risk. Because what happens if Diaz beats McGregor? Remember, he beat him clearly the first time. The second time, I thought McGregor won the fight, but it was close, and it was a war. It's very possible Diaz is able to, turn that around for number 3 and get the win. And then what do you do? Because then it makes no sense to do McGregor versus Poirier. No, with the doctor injury, the only smart business move here is for Conor to heal up and then run it back. Doesn't matter if Poirier is champion. And I know this is going to piss off a lot of people, as it does the merit-based fan in me. But I will say this prediction now begrudgingly. If Dustin Poirier fights Charlie Olives and wins the belt, and then McGregor is healed up and ready to go, they will do Poirier versus McGregor for lightweight title. 100%. It will make no sense. It will cause a lot of people to get very, very upset, but they will do it. And it will sell gangbusters. Easy. I think with the title on the line, I think that probably elevates it to a 2 million range. I think that's Dana's dream. And that's the thing. In the meantime, they can book Poirier versus Oliveira, because even if Poirier loses to Oliveira, okay, then you just run back the 4th Conor fight. That's fine. People will still watch it. That has almost no bearing on this feud that's been created now. And we can go down the moral ramifications of Conor McGregor's behavior. If you haven't seen my tweet that blew up or the video we did on it, go ahead and check out the other videos here and you can see all that. But business-wise, I mean, there's now legitimate bad blood between the two, which will sell. It is the only fight to make. So that's what the UFC does on that. For McGregor, this obviously isn't the outcome that he wanted, right? But he stuck to his gun that we've seen other people do. And I think it's going to end up paying off for him, right? Where even when they know they're completely wrong or they don't really have much evidence to stand on, he stuck to his guns. He said he was confident second round was going to turn around, be his round. The leg kicks were working, and that was just a freak injury, and it was BS. It was stoppage, not an actual stoppage, and then went straight into the terrible shit that he said about Dustin and his wife. But I think that really worked out in terms of keeping a lot of his fans engaged and interested in a fourth fight. I think that kept his diehard fans, gave them a way out in terms of reconciling McGregor getting stopped again. And to that end, from a business perspective, he did the right thing, right? I'm not talking moral to clarify that, because if moral, we're in a completely ballpark. But from a business perspective, injury by immediate denial of how the fight was going and trash talk toward the opponent to literally incite bad blood. He's got Poirier's wife flipping him off. I mean, that's about as good as it gets right there, right? I mean, that's a good time from a business perspective. The UFC is looking at that and saying, yep, we're doing number 4, hands down. And that's why Dana said it. So I was definitely short in my pay-per-view prediction, but I'm really interested to see how the fourth one goes, because they will do a fourth one, barring some crazy injury or some ridiculousness. They fourth fight between the two, and I am very curious to see how the fight goes. Even though I'm pretty sure Poirier will take it, but I am curious to see how the fight goes, and I'm also very curious to see what it does business-wise, because I think the UFC has not only found a great, bad blood feud rivalry, they found it with one of their biggest stars, which is a very, very big deal. I think this feud could easily eclipse Diaz versus McGregor and turn into a massive thing. Khabib versus McGregor is a little bit different because Khabib was undefeated. It was McGregor coming back after all that time, all that. But I mean, this could be about as close as you're going to get to Khabib versus McGregor. And we'll see what happens with it. All right, so next thing to talk about is McGregor's drawing power from here, right? So I've kind of hinted, and I've more than hinted, I've basically explained how well McGregor versus Poirier 4 will do. But what happens, all right, in a scenario where either he doesn't fight Poirier or he fights somebody before he fights Poirier? A lot of people are saying, I mean, that's it. His star is fading. He's on the decline. You have a lot of media that normally don't say that much ill will towards McGregor and his style are now kind of piling on, saying, yeah, he's not the guy he once was. He's out of his prime, all of this. You've got Stephen A. Smith, saying, oh, he's not elite anymore, all of this. Here's the thing, right? I'm going to let you in on a little secret. Conor McGregor hasn't been elite since he beat Eddie Alvarez. In the sense that he went and boxed Floyd Mayweather, but he came back and he got dominated by Khabib, right? If Khabib is still champion, I mean, you're looking at McGregor versus Khabib too, but do you think that fight goes any other way than it did the first time? Especially seeing what Poirier's done to him? I don't think so. That's not to say he's not an extremely good fighter. And if you want to put him in the realm of the elite still, I mean, I guess you could argue, yes, he still hasn't lost to, several other people in the top 5 or so it's possible, right? And Khabib is gone. So it's possible he could still beat a lot of those other guys and be elite. but he's not the top tier anymore. He's not one of the guys where you can look at him and say, oh, he could win the belt. And he really wasn't ever since Khabib's been champion and that first fight went down. Now, when Khabib left, a lot of people speculated that he might come back and take the crown and knock everybody out, do that. But, Poirier has shown in the last two fights that McGregor's kind of lost a step. He stepped away from the sport to make great business moves, right? We here at the Fight Business Podcast applaud his business acumen all the time. But he hasn't been training MMA nonstop and really just going into that and all that. A lot of these media are just finally catching on to that, especially more of the mainstream media like Stephen A. Smith or Max Kellerman, who don't follow MMA that much. They might know about a couple of different, fights, or they might kind of semi-follow it, right? But whether they follow it hardcore or not, they've seemingly been under the delusion that McGregor is still, right up there, could beat anybody. More of the hardcore fans know that, Khabib was always going to stop McGregor just like he did the first time. And then once you get into that top echelon, maybe he could have, hung with people. But after that first fight with Dustin, it really didn't look like it. So it seems like now most of the media is catching up and accepting that fact. That doesn't affect Conor McGregor's drawing power. Let me state that again. Him losing, him no longer being that upper echelon, belt contender, belt holder type of guy, doesn't affect his drawing power, at least not in the way a lot of people are expecting it to. Conor has reached a level of superstardom and notoriety that him fighting at all is going to result in big pay-per-view buys. Now, will those buys, diminish slightly? Yes. I could easily see if they put him in there against RDA, I could see that maybe doing 1 million or 1.2 or something. But Poirier versus only did 1.3. It's still going to be 1 million pay-per-view buy event. He's reached a threshold that it really doesn't matter what his record looks like as long as he's still doing the McGregor things. Now, if he goes on a crazy losing streak where he loses like 8 in a row, okay, then you're talking about real hits to the drawing power. But right now, he's technically on a 2-fight losing streak, right? Beat Cerrone and then lost to Poirier twice. And he's, able to fall back on this, injury issue. He would have won round 2, all this type of stuff. His brand is fine. A lot of people compared him to Adrian Broner. I believe John Nash did, as well as a couple others. Broner went out and lost a bunch in boxing. Didn't matter. He was still drawing big numbers. Look at Pacquiao. Pacquiao's done similar. Where, he lost towards the end, and guess what? Still draws big numbers. Tyson just came out of retirement, did that whole, old fight at Triller and all that. Did great numbers. McGregor's in that same area, that same threshold. He's crossed over and become a true crossover star. He's done enough outside of the sport that he's always going to have people that come and view his fights, especially the casual McGregor fans. There are some MMA fans that only watch Conor McGregor fight. And my guess is that unless he loses 1 million in a row and looks just terrible doing it, they'll continue to pay money to watch him fight. Especially if McGregor is still doing all the antics he normally does, and if he can rattle off a win here or there. He doesn't have to win every fight. He doesn't even have to win against most of the top 5. If he's able to win and still trash talk and still do his swagger, that's enough. And that's not to say that he can't bounce back and become elite again. I know a lot of people are going to give me weird looks for this, but remember, McGregor's only 32, right? Or maybe 33 because his birthday just happened. I'm not quite sure. But either way, he's still in that range where he could hypothetically make adjustments and come back strong. We've seen fighters do this where, they have kind of a lull for a little bit and then they bounce back. We've seen other fighters do this. McGregor could pull that off. And there will always be that kind of mystery of like, oh, I wonder if McGregor could pull that off, right? So I firmly believe that while, it doesn't help his drawing power that he's lost to Poirier, he's still got it. And from the business perspective, if Poirier gets a rub and now has a higher drawing power against just about anybody, and McGregor stays pretty much stagnant, or maybe dips just a little bit, but less, or not as much as Poirier is able to gain, that's a win from the UFC perspective, right? Because overall, your total pay-per-view numbers increase. So the UFC's fine with that. As long as Conor's numbers don't dip too much and Poirier is able to now bring in an extra 200-300K, that's a win for the promotion. So the next question is, okay, if Conor really has fallen and can't get back to, that upper echelon, that title fight contender level, then where does he go? What does the UFC do with it? Well, there's obviously Diaz-McGregor 3, and a lot of people are calling for that right now, but I feel like you wait on that because that's always going to be there. That's always going to be there. I think if Diaz and McGregor both lose another 3 fights each, you still put on that pay-per-view, it still does at least 1.2, 1.3 million. Maybe a little bit less because they would have both lost that many. But still, you get the picture. It's always still there. It's the ace in the hole. They can always pull that out when they really need to. And I think the UFC will save that for a time when the business needs a bump and they know they can get that guaranteed squeeze. So let's say that, Poirier 4 doesn't happen, or it happens and Conor loses again. What do you do with him? I think the best move the promotion can do is start matching him up against people that, one, have a little bit of a name value to themselves, or 2, are trash talkers as well, right? There's a lot of different ways you can pivot McGregor against people and still get a good buildup and thus a good pay-per-view. Even if it's up-and-coming contenders, right? Let's Islam Makhachev. Are you telling me that Islam Makhachev goes out and wins this Saturday and then maybe wins another one here or there, and then they do Conor McGregor versus Khabib's protege? Not only Khabib's protege, but a man who's been knocked out before. So there's a little bit more mystique. It's not that he's a complete Khabib clone that has been perfect and, seemingly eaten shots and just rolled with it. Here's a guy who got knocked out in the Octagon against Adriano Martins. That adds a little bit of mystique. Are you telling me that wouldn't do well? Even if Makhachev's ranked number 8, number 9? There's so many places you could go with that. There's so many. Let's say Kevin Lee wants to go back down to lightweight and do that whole thing. You telling me that the trash talk between Kevin Lee and McGregor wouldn't be something to see? And wouldn't review by? I think a lot of people would eat that up. You put him against people that either play off him well and could create good feuds, or people that he can beat. So it keeps him in that, aura of, oh, he's still got it. He's just had a setback, but he can bounce back, right? You keep that mystique there. That, oh man, he's come back and he's, beaten the number 12th ranked guy, or he's beaten an RDA. Oh man, he just beat RDA. Maybe he can come back. Maybe he can do these things. Doesn't matter what RDA's record is. He's a former lightweight champion. He is ranked at lightweight. Makes a lot of sense. And I'm not saying RDA is the opponent and that Conor could necessarily just beat him handily, but you get my point. There are different ways you can promote him where McGregor is still an extremely tool. A big reason they've kept around a lot of guys or former champs was so that the younger guys could beat them and have their stock rise. Right? Now think about what happens. You've had a lot of former champs that stuck around for a while and that have kind of been used as the gatekeepers. Now think about what happens when that former champ is McGregor. Not only do the new guys' stock rise tremendously, but you get very good numbers for McGregor to essentially be a gatekeeper. And if McGregor is okay with it, right, it's going to depend a lot on his ego, where he's at, what he wants to do. But if he's willing to take those fights, that's good money for him. And it's easy business, hypothetically, in his eyes, right? Oh, you want me to fight this up-and-coming guy that I'm pretty sure I can smoke? I mean, I'm Conor McGregor. Cool, let's do it. Easy money, right? And it keeps his aura about it. The aura and what McGregor has done up until this point does not just go away because he can't win the belt or beat the top echelon guys. There are so many ways you can market him against trash talkers and new up-and-comers and people that he can just flat out beat older veterans if you really want him to get a win, that the cash cow is still very much there. It might dip a little, but we're not talking about, the ceiling, or rather the floor dropping out and tanking. We're not talking about Conor McGregor drawing 300,000 buys. If he loses a lot in a row, maybe, but otherwise his drawing power is secure. He's hit that level. So don't expect him to go away anytime soon unless he just only wants those top fights. If that's the case, then he'll retire or he'll do something similar to Rousey and go do other ventures, something of that nature. But as long as he wants to fight, he will still be allowed to fight. The UFC can promote him in a way where he's still making 1 million plus pay-per-view buys, and he'll still be a star in the sport. That will never change in the short term. Long term, as long as they don't book him in a way where he's fighting killers and getting smoked every which way, or his chin just deteriorates or something crazy, I mean, he'll be fine until, again, he hangs up the gloves. He's always going to be a star in the sport at this point. He's done too much. It's as simple as that. All right, next thing I want to talk about, because it kind of ties into what I was just talking about with McGregor's drawing power and everything, is nostalgia. Right? Robbie Lawler versus Nick Diaz 2. A lot of people were going nuts for this. And it is a big fight announcement. It is a rematch 17 years in the making. Last time they fought, Diaz was 20. He'll be 37, almost 38, coming up here in August, I believe, when he gets back into the Octagon. Against Robbie Lawler, who has had a rough go of it as of late, but, fought about a year ago against Neil Magny. Hasn't looked like old Robbie, right? I mean, ever since the knockout loss to Tyron Woodley, where he lost his belt, Ruthless has looked a little, It's been rough. Yet, so many people are excited for this fight. I mean, so many people are just downright ecstatic that Nick Diaz is about to make that walk again to the Octagon. Why is that? Well, Nick Diaz is a somewhat legend in the sport, right? He's one of the Diaz brothers. We've seen Nate have his own rise ever since he beat Conor. But, I mean, Nick was the guy for a long time. It was Nick versus GSP was the fight to make. Nick versus BJ Penn, all that. Nick was the dude back in the day. And it's one of those things where when you look at Nick's most recent performances, right, his fight against Anderson Silva, he didn't look particularly great. He looked a little bit older. He looked like he didn't quite have the same step that he used to. But people don't care. That was 6 years ago, right? 5 years ago. Whatever it was, one of those two. People just want to see the old vet come back and fight. I think if Robbie Lawler was booked against just about anybody else right now, they'd be like, oh, okay. Like, say he was booked against Ponzinibbio or, somebody else again, whoever. They'd be like, okay, oh, poor Robbie. Okay. Hamzat. They'd be like, oh, okay, that's a little bit there because it's Chimaev, but still Robbie. But Robbie versus Diaz, oh, man. That gets people excited. Nostalgia, especially in the past 3 or 4 years, has been a powerful tool across all industries, right? Think about the number of 90s TV shows or early 2000s TV shows that have had a reboot or some sort of special about them lately. Friends comes to mind, right? That's the biggest one. I think that's up for an Emmy for a reunion special, was widely viewed. Rugrats, a show that I viewed when I was just a little kid, is now back in 3D on one of the streaming platforms, maybe HBO Max, I'm not sure. iCarly was another one when I was a little bit older. I didn't watch that one too much, but that went away, and I know that was a big show. All of a sudden, that's coming back in an adult form. Nostalgia is very much a big consumer want in the millennial generation, it seems. And it, again, seems to be that way regardless of the product. And this is something that you can look at almost any industry and there's some form of nostalgia. Domino's recently brought back commercials with the Noid, right? And that was way back in the day. It's crazy. And it's not just millennials, I suppose. It's everyone. But, I mean, it is just something that's happening right now. Lots of remakes of movies, lots of rehashes of TV shows, lots of advertising focusing on the old style. Pizza Hut has their old, their old commercials, or at least the old diners in their commercials now for all their new stuff. Nostalgia is very big. It's been very big the past few years. It's been a massive success for businesses trying to re-engage consumers. The UFC and MMA is no exception, right? I have people talking about how, Matt Brown is just looking awesome, and it's great to see him in there. Same with Carlos Condit. I mean, if you put Carlos Condit or Matt Brown in there with a top 10 or top 5 guy, I don't think it goes very well, right? I think it might be a bad night for people, for those guys. But the nostalgia's there. It really is. And people love to see the guys they grew up watching fight go in there and have a competitive battle. And they will tune in and they will pay to watch that. It's just a fact of life at this point. I mean, imagine Ronda Rousey comes back, right? Imagine Ronda Rousey comes back after having a kid, doing all that stuff. It's been several years, even though she lost pretty badly her last 2 fights. And she comes back at, let's say, 38. You think people wouldn't be all about seeing her fight somebody? Even though she's clearly well past her prime, and who knows how she would do in there as the sport has really evolved. No, she'd do 1 million+ buys easy. And that goes back to what I was talking about with Conor. I mean, she's reached the level of superstardom that would easily, people would be all about it. Hardcore fans would be like, oh, are you kidding me? Yeah, let's do this. That'd be great. Easily be all about it. I mean, it's nuts. It's nostalgia is a good marketing tool and a good product to sell occasionally. And that's what this fight is. And when you look at the main event and co-main, right? You've got Valentina in the co-main, I believe it's co-main, or it might be actually the third fight. She's not even co-main. And you've got Volk versus Ortega as the main event. Those are good fights, and people will be excited about them, but they're not necessarily proven draws. Whereas a Nick Diaz fight, I would imagine that's going to boost things quite a bit. I wouldn't be shocked at all if you end up getting in the 500, 600,000 range based on Nick coming back and fighting. Not even in the slightest. And that's partially because of nostalgia. Because if you put Nick Diaz after that long of a layoff in there against somebody really dangerous, right? Well, then, who knows what happens. But Robbie, you've got the rematch in the making for so long and all that stuff. I mean, that will sell. That will sell. Nostalgia always sells to a certain point, especially nowadays, and that will help increase pay-per-view buys. I bet you will have some people that don't really watch MMA that much anymore. That kind of fell off from the old school days that may say, oh, Diaz and Lawler are fighting again? That's awesome. Yeah, I'll go ahead and buy. Right? Same with what happened with Tyson versus Roy Jones. That was never going to be a bout that showed exceptional athleticism or skill in boxing at this point with their age. No. That was never going to happen. But people just wanted to see that fight. Are you telling me right now if they booked GSP versus Anderson Silva, they wouldn't go ahead and make a bunch of money? Or brought back Showtime Pettis and did Pettis versus Aldo? No, it'd be nostalgia. All the fight that got away, all this stuff. Of course. So that's the theory here. And don't be shocked if they keep doing this, especially with some of the bigger stars that will get older in age. If people really step away for a long time, don't be shocked if they bring them back to fight, Legends League style, like Vitor Belfort talked about. We've seen how effective that can be. We've seen what it can generate in boxing. We've seen what it can generate in other sports. We've seen what it can generate across other industries. Nostalgia will sell. That's why this fight is being booked. That's why it's been put on this particular card, because I think they're looking to see exactly what Nick's drawing power is, because I would say this is a rare circumstance where someone not in the main event probably has more pull than not. A rare UFC 200 situation with all that fallout, and you have Brock fighting Mark Hunt, even though Nunes and Misha are the main event. It's a rare circumstance. So it's a smart business move. Probably the best way that they can put together a Nick Diaz fight right now, because they don't going to have long. Hats off to him. And we'll see what happens. We'll see how UFC 262 does. I'm very curious to see those pay-per-view numbers. Next up, got to talk about some PFL news. So Scott Fantana at the New York Post broke a story today that, when I'm recording this, which is the day before, by the way, spoiler, I don't actually record right on Thursdays. At least not most of the time. But he broke a story that essentially talks about the PFL season for 2022 and beyond. And there are some interesting tidbits in there. For one, Anthony Pettis and Fabricio Verdum are going to return. So I know there's been some talk about Verdum versus Fedor happening, and that would be a good move for Bellator. But it sounds like they're kind of staking their territory and saying, oh, well, we'd work with you, Bellator, but Fabricio is technically under contract with us, which tells me that unlike what some fighters sign with PFL, where they have like a year contract just for that season, Fabricio and Pettis signed for multi-year deals. That's not that shocking. They couldn't have those guys go in there, win the belts, and then say, all right, I'm going to Bellator, I'm going back to the UFC or what have you. They couldn't allow that. So I'm not extremely, I'm not shocked or extremely thrown off by that. I think that makes a lot of sense. Then you have probably the biggest business news in that PFL is looking to expand events and go from 10 to 20. And here's the tweet here from Scott Fantana. PFL plans to launch both a pay-per-view division and a PFL Challenger series to identify prospects to be added to the season, per CEO Peter Murray. This would up the number of PFL events from 10 in 2021 to more than 20 in 2022. Pay-per-view division. Instantly was ridiculed, right? Saw John Nash, saw Luke Thomas, saw a bunch of people being like, are you kidding me? What? Huh? Like, unless the price point's like $5 No one's going to pay for this. And when you look at PFL's ratings, it's understandable. 2 reasons I can see this happening. There's one, which is a very lofty reason, but I'll throw it out there because it's possible, is we only see the ratings from PFL on ESPN or ESPN2. It's very possible that it's a highly watched series or show on the app, and we just don't have the numbers. When I say highly possible, also, I mean pretty much a long shot, but a very big long shot. But I will throw it out there as a possibility because it is. I haven't seen the ESPN Plus numbers. Very few people do. Maybe it's very popular. Who knows? Could be. But let's put that one aside and look at the other reason. What I think is the much more likely reason why the PFL has decided to do this. It was brought up that the PFL's broadcast deal with ESPN was 2 years. And it was supposed to be for the 2019 and 2020 season. Obviously, the 2020 season got nixed because of COVID. My guess is there was a clause in there to extend that, or ESPN and PFL worked it out to extend that into 2021 and enabled that to, go through that entire season since they didn't get the 2 seasons they paid for. But that contract is probably up at the end of this year. And there's no guarantee that ESPN is going to renew, especially with the news out today, right? If the ratings that have been shown on ESPN and ESPN2, if that viewership is similar on ESPN Plus, wouldn't be shocked for ESPN to say, all right, that was great, bye. We're done here. In which case, there might be new broadcast partners, or there might be other options for the PFL, right? Or this could be a ploy to boost their outlook and numbers to get ESPN to re-sign. That is also very plausible. Because, again, going back into the world of a startup, which is what the PFL is, oftentimes in a startup, you are really, and we've talked about this before on the podcast. If you haven't seen the episodes, go check them out. Specifically talking about one championship in PFL. But you are really trying hard to keep that perception growing, even if internally things are bad, right? I can't tell you the amount of startups that I've either consulted with or I just know through friends, and because I'm in that kind of tech startup scene here in Austin, where on the outside, they are projecting that they've got crazy customer acquisition and crazy revenue and growth numbers. And internally, things are just on fire everywhere. You've got money running out. You've got internal, employee problems. You've got partner issues, vendors that aren't satisfied, customers that aren't satisfied, but maybe under NDAs. So it's kind of a whole legal area. I've seen that so many times I can't count. Where they are projecting this, we're growing, we're making it, we're going to be one of those guys that, changes the world. And here's all the proof that we're changing the world. And then internally it's like, man, the VP of sales just quit. Or the VP of customer service just got poached and took half his team with him. I mean, VP of operations, probably not a VP of customer service, but you get my point, is that the PFL right now can't be looking at those ratings that we all see on ESPN and thinking, oh, we're in a good spot. And they can't be particularly happy, as I mentioned before, about, not only their champions losing, but also the guys they brought in to kind of like be bigger stars and that already had a name, like Fabricio and Pettis not making it to the playoffs. Champions losing is one thing that can technically boost them, as I've said before, but it's not a good time that you spent all that money and that neither of those guys even made the playoffs. It's not a great look. So this gambit to say, hey, we're going to start a pay-per-view division and look for a prospecting division might be their pitch, their public pitch to ESPN or to other broadcast partners. and say, look, we're about to get pay-per-view revenue, right? We're about to, start this prospect kind of like, not tough, but, kind of like a bit of a series that, well, maybe they get added to the season. It's a whole new element. It's a new element to change things up. That's a classic startup tactic. It's making your pitch in public to see who bites. And then if you have, let's say, an Access TV or somebody else come along and say, all right, we might be interested in a deal. Let me see the numbers. They will then mock up things being like, hey, we had 300,000 or 400,000 viewers or 200,000 viewers on this particular night. Let's say it's 400,000 viewers this particular night. Even if we just convert 5% of those to pay-per-view, we'll end up with X amount of revenue. And because our overhead is lower and et cetera, it's still profitable. And, our league format is really great. Now we're looking at these prospect series. You can imagine how that pitch goes. And obviously I'm not, a pitch guy. I'm not a CEO or a startup venture type of guy where I'm out there pitching all the time. But there are people that are very good at that can sell you just about anything as long as they have just enough information to back it up, even if it's vague. And remember, on the accounting side of things, you can manipulate quite a bit. Accounting nowadays for business is always, there's a reason that there are analysts that have to come in and look at different public stocks and why those analysts disagree so much and why you can have a just plethora of different accountants look at the same business and come up with different answers. You can do some magic with accounting, business accounting specifically. There are different ways you can move things around. You can do things where it's all legal, but it paints a very different picture than maybe what's really going on or hides certain things that internally. That's always been true, but especially nowadays, it's something else. So I'm sure Peter Murray is out there pitching this, and he has some numbers to back it up, and he's probably getting a couple bites, whether that's with ESPN or other broadcast partners. I'm sure there's probably some interest, or at least they're hoping there's some interest, because this is the pitch. The pitch is, hey, we're going to get pay-per-view revenue, and we're starting up these other series. We're going to extend the season. It's going to be longer, have more events, all this stuff. And we've still got our stars like Kayla and Lori's making it to the playoffs, so who knows how, and we still got Showtime Pettis and Fabricio and all this stuff. That's the pitch. How successful it will be is still unknown. But make no mistake, they need a broadcast partner, especially with the amount of money that they've put into this and what they've been trying to build. I imagine if PFL lost ESPN and couldn't find an immediate broadcast partner, that's kind of circling the drain a little bit. I wouldn't be shocked if some investors then kind of balk and say, I don't know about that. Or new investors are saying, no way, not with everything going on, all that. So that's what's happening in this scenario. You've got really just the PFL going out there and making a public pitch, and in a worst case scenario saying, hey, just let us try this. We're successful before. Look, we got ESPN broadcast deal, all of that. If they're leaving ESPN, that is. Like, let us try this. Here's the numbers. Here's how we're going to back it up, all of that. And they're hoping somebody is yes, I'm all about it. And I for one hope they do get interest. Because I do like the PFL format. I want them to do well. I understand the skepticism here about like, what, pay-per-view? Yes, I'm with you there. But remember, it's all about the pitch. If they get a broadcast deal, even if their pay-per-views are terrible, if they get a broadcast deal for 2 or 3 years, and that's already well known, that's okay. Because they can pivot from there. They'll have a longer runway to make changes. But without a broadcast deal, they're kind of dead. And so that's really what this gambit, to be like, please, let's go ahead and sign the ink on another broadcast rights deal. That's why they're doing this pay-per-view, in my opinion. That would be my best guess. Maybe they've run the numbers and those numbers come out great and it's a whole thing and we're all going to look stupid. Very possible. I suppose. I don't know if I want to say very possible. Possible, I suppose. But this is a startup pitch for a broadcast media rights partner. Make no mistake about it. That's what's happening in this scenario. All right, last thing I want to touch on here is David Levy, the former president of Turner Media, has joined One Championship's board of directors. It's a big deal because One is looking to have their first U.S. show sometime here soon. I mean, the date keeps getting pushed back and thrown around a lot, but we know there are plans to have One Championship shows on U.S. soil. So this is part of getting that done, as well as we know One Championship's been going through the whole SPAC and everything there to raise money. Makes a lot of sense that you end up with a guy like this on your board. And it's a big get. I mean, this is a guy who, has some sway and pull in that arena and is a well-known name in the business side of things when it comes to media broadcast rights. We've seen other, platforms get people like this before. DAZN comes to mind, right? Getting former ESPN president. Oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm blanking on his name. But you can look it up. But yeah, so DAZN, right? Peter somebody. We've seen that before where somebody who's been proven in that space and then been brought on in some capacity to help. And that was different because that was actually like becoming the president of DAZN and getting in the operations. This is a little bit different being on the board of directors, but still big get for the promotion. And, according to the International Business Times, the article I have up here, Levy was stated as saying, One has built a remarkable content platform around its martial arts and esports business that is captivating global audiences, especially younger tech-savvy viewers and fans. In just 10 years, the company has achieved a level of worldwide popularity that took other sports franchises many decades to build. I'm honored to join the board, yada, 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 all that stuff. So from all of that, he's going to be brought in to work on the digital media rights side and be kind of an advisor there. And I think, when you're looking at this for why he would want this opportunity, they're probably, he's probably getting a good amount of money out of it. But on top of that, probably also an opportunity that he sees where while One has had its struggles and is financially in just a whole different world, as we've talked about, want to talk about a startup, right? This is the example. They have pulled off some things and been able to get numbers in the space and in certain countries where they are able to penetrate through and really grab that market. And Myanmar by far is the best example, with Aung Lang Song being kind of a star over there. If One is able to monetize that viewership in some way, or able to transition that over into the United States and monetize viewership over here, then there's a lot of potential for One. If they get a broadcast deal done, right? Just talk about PFL and broadcast deals. Here we are with One, same type of boat. If they're able to get a lucrative broadcast deal done because of Levy being on the board, that right there, it pays for itself easily. As I mentioned, that's really what One is going after with the SPAC and with everything's going on. They're trying to get a broadcast media rights deal. They had several shows on TNT. They're trying to maybe line up something to be on TNT full time and show all of their programming, or something like TNT, something where they get paid a good sum of money just to host shows. That's really what they need at this point. They have lost a ton of money. They've poured so much into marketing to build up their marketing numbers and project this, hey, we're a global company. We've got all this popularity, all this stuff. But internally, we know, and you can go to thebodylock.com and look at the story that I wrote regarding their publicly, listed finances, because in Singapore, you put those out there. We know that they've lost a lot of money in the past several years. And 2020's financials aren't out yet, but we know it's probably far worse than 2019, where they lost around 100 million US dollars. They do have a revenue stream there, but they're pouring so much into marketing and other costs that it's kind of hard to say how they ever turn a profit without some major broadcast deal, so that they can kind of maybe pull that marketing cost back. Because I would imagine all of that is just to tout those numbers where they talk about social media impressions and all the potential viewers and all these other things. It is to sell that to a broadcast partner. Exact same situation as PFL almost. And David Levy being on the board, a former president of Turner Media, which TNT, Turner, yeah, I'll let you guys figure that one out. Not a bad call at all. That might help seal the deal and bridge the gap in terms of whatever needs to be done to get one championship on TNT regularly. It's very possible that's a lot of why this is happening. There could be other reasons, but he's definitely being brought on to help with the broadcast side, for sure. So, smart move by one, getting a guy like Levy on the board. They say they're announcing big things soon and all of that. Shocked if we end up with a TNT one broadcast media partnership. I don't know when it would be announced, but I'm telling you right now, that would be my prediction. Based on what I've heard internally from kind of rumblings, as well as bringing Levy on the board. That's at least what they're working towards, as far as I can understand. Makes a lot of sense. They've already had 4 shows on TNT. They didn't do spectacular, but they didn't do awful numbers. Well, some of them did, but one of them did very well, I'm pretty sure, looking back on it. I'd have to go back and look at the ratings, but that's where the idea of this is all going. So, good get by one championship. We'll see what happens, but smart play on their part, because they need to up their revenue, and that's bringing on a guy like that is one way to help them get there. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. We've had a lot of technical issues with this episode, but I wanted to get it out for tomorrow on time. So I'm hoping it's all edited in a way that's great. Shout out to producer Jake for doing that, because it can't be a fun night for him. Make sure if you're watching on YouTube, like, subscribe, bell notification if you haven't done that already. If you're listening on Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Podcast Addict, whatever, I love you guys. Appreciate the love and everything else. Let me know in the comments, again, what you feel about these topics. If you have any topics you want me to cover, let me know. I'm always doing that. I try to incorporate every fan request I get, so let me know as well on that end. If you got anything you want me to look at, more than happy to do it. But yeah, lots of stuff going down. I expect big business news coming out here soon about a lot of other things. We'll see what happens. But yeah, in the meantime, you know what to do. Get money. Talk to you guys next time.